welcome to Fun Problems, the problems of fun. I'm Peter C. Hayward.
And I'm AJ Brandon.
For
Live!
the first time, you can see our beautiful smiling faces and our beautiful smiling backgrounds. Some of us have put more effort into the background than others. I'm not going to name any names. The viewer can decide who. The viewer and listener, we have both now.
Well, I mean, our listeners are just confused right now because they're listening to a normal episode being like, what are they talking about?
Do you want to explain what's happening, A to the J?
Yes, we are now recording video as well as audio so we can upload this. It's going to be experimental. We'll see how it goes. But we are now doing one take, goes up live however it goes, and hopefully people enjoy it and find it on YouTube.
And if the video version sucks, this whole part will be cut and we'll just record a new intro. This episode is sponsored by Monster Rehab because that's what I'm going to be drinking. How much money did they pay us, AJ?
Well, how many bottles did they give you? I don't have anything.
None. Nothing. I just drink them. I love them. AJ, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about unhelpful advice, and you wanted to frame this in a particular way. Do you want to explain how you wanted to frame it and why you wanted to frame it the way you wanted to frame it?
Yes, so basically I've been doing this for a while and people ask me, like, how do I X? And I've hit the point where I've accrued a big pile of advice that doesn't help people, which is sort of the opposite of the point of this podcast. But where my hope is that in this episode, I will share the unhelpful version of the advice, and you will convert that into something actually actionable for the listener / viewer, for the audience, because I don't know how to do it. A lot of this is going to be like, just start 12 years ago and be me. And very few people, not no one, but very few people can do that.
Yeah, so thanks for giving me the easy job this week with the Peter-led episode.
Yeah. the first in many months. Should we jump straight into it, or do we have any follow-up?
Yeah, let's jump into it. I imagine that the way this is going to play out is going to be, we riff a bit back and forth on it. I don't think you actually have no useful advice or no element of this.
Well, I'm glad you set up so nicely, because the first one I have, I think, is the most helpful and is probably something we've talked about before. So I signed 9 games this year. I just got a contract for my 5th or 6th game this year. I'm signing games at a pretty high rate, which is I don't think it's arrogant to state that as a fact. It is a fact. Very few people are signing games at the rate that I am, and so how am I doing that is the question. He said somewhat egotistically. I'm asking myself this question, but people genuinely do ask me this. First piece of advice, which is something that we've talked about, is I now focus so hard on product. I am not like, I don't even let a game get past the first stage. You know how like you kill your darlings or whatever? That's stage 0 for me. I start with a title, and then once I have a title and a theme that even if the game didn't work, that title and that theme would sell, then I go into my folder and I'm like, okay, what mechanism that I'm excited about can I apply to this? So start with the title, product. I'll give an example, which is that about 3 months ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and was like, I got it. I had a game, title, concept, theme, product that I just knew would sell. And like, as much as anyone can know. And this is why it's unhelpful. Like, how do you know? I've been doing this for 13 years. What I used to do, and I don't do it. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 stories. What I don't do anymore, and I used to do, is come up with a game and design a full game, and then sort of like 70% of the way through, be like, and what would a theme for this be? I'm gonna use my game Cartouche, which is right here. If you're watching the video, an example of this. This one had a generic nothing theme. It was like, what if water existed? And I designed this full game, and then Jeff Fraser came in and redesigned it and made it actually function, which my version didn't. And then once we were done, we were like, great, we've got this cool, interesting mechanism, cool, interesting game with no theme. And that is so much harder to theme. We had to work backwards and be like, well, what could this be? How would this work? What does make sense? And we came up with like Egypt, which is a fine theme. It's a non-theme theme almost. Like, it works for all the mechanisms. We tried to make it more themey by making it about Hatshepsut, who was the female pharaoh who got erased from history and you're trying to restore her. But it was really like starting with the game and then working backwards and trying to get a product to fit into it. And it was a huge flop that cost the company thousands and thousands of dollars because no one was excited by that product. This was our first big box. Show and Tile was our previous one, but that was still like a $20, $30 game. This was our first like entry into the Euro space, and we started with game and then went to we started with mechanism and then went to product, and it didn't work. The example that I'll give is that I woke up in the middle of the night and was like, I got it. I got a full product, and the idea was witches brew, and you were witches brewing coffee in a coffee store. And correct me if I'm wrong, AJ, but I know who's going to buy that. I know what that's going to look like on Kickstarter. I know everything about that's going to sell. Witches Brew is an amazing title for that. It tells you everything about the game, and I am confident in myself, again, unhelpful advice, to know that I can design that game. So I went into my folder of mechanisms, was like, this one, aha, pulled it out. Within a week or however long it took, I think I spent 11 hours in a single day just working on this and nothing else, sort of hyperfixating. I had a game that I was super proud of and a theme I was really proud of. I iterated over the course of the week. I printed it, got ready to show to a publisher, and then this happened. I'm going to show you the video watches, and AJ is going to describe it. This game got announced. AJ, can you describe what you're seeing?
I can't because while we are live, my internet connection isn't holding up super well for the recording, uploading, and doing this. But I know the story.
From previous, yeah. It is a game called T-Witches by the artist and designer of Flamecraft. Flamecraft is another amazing instant buy from the title alone game. And so Witches Brew is dead. And that's fine, these things happen. I end up retheming it to something that's like adjacent, but different enough that it separates itself. But the way that I always look at this is like, what a good sign. I came up with this very saleable game and discovered that in the week that I was working on it, someone announced that game in a very saleable way. So my first piece of unhelpful advice, which I think is the most helpful, they're going to get least helpful from here, is product. Start with a title that will sell. AJ, how can that be utilized?
I have a few notes on this one. First, I want to talk about the title specifically, and then I want to touch a little bit on product design. I don't want to go too deep on this because we have actually talked a fair bit about product design, including my talk, Why Your Good Game Won't Sell. Check it out on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description below, which I have also referenced on here a few times, but I'm going to bring that same video up a few times because it's great advice. But for titles, I just have a couple examples of different titles that are good in different ways. Scott Alms, I think, is a genius at product design. I think you should look at all of his games to see how to do it.
100%. I mean, genuinely, if someone is a successful designer, they're probably good at this.
Yes, I would say
not exclusively, but probably. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I'd say one big success, like one hit, doesn't necessarily mean it. If you've got two, it's like almost definitely.
I think of John Gilmore as almost being like for the last decade, or for a period of time, the king of this. Dead of Winter was what's the show? The Walking Dead as a board game. Dinosaur Island was Jurassic Park as a board game. He had another one. Vault Wars was another one, and he had a fourth one as well. He just kept on
Dinosaur Island,
almost predicting the trend. Did I not say Dinosaur Island? I meant to say Dinosaur Island. He kept on, and then A Path of Light and Shadow was Game of Thrones, and he just had this real knack for reading the zeitgeist and designing that right before anyone else did.
Mm-hmm. And the Tiny Epic series is just such a good name. Immediately tells you what it is, gets you interested in it. Tiny and Epic, how do you do that? So You've Been Eaten. Just such an alluring, emotional feeling thing, you know?
Kids on Bikes, John Gilmore, same thing, capitalizing on the Stranger Things kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Charcuterie. Kids on Brooms as a follow-up. Oh, Charcuterie, that was it.
Right?
I saw that Kickstarter, didn't read a single mechanism, immediately bought it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew my girlfriend's a foodie, and I knew she would go nuts for that game, and she did. She's played that more times than a lot of my games.
Some recent examples. Let's Hit Each Other with Fake Swords.
What's that game? Is that what it's called?
It's a game. Yeah, that's what it's called. That's the title.
Oh, I haven't heard of this one.
It's from Exploding Kittens and I think Eric Lang. Eric Lang's involved with Exploding Kids, right? And it's a card game where you're trying to get sets of cards, but frequently you'll break into duels over the cards, and then you have different rules based off the cards, how to hit you with fake swords. I haven't played it, but what an amazing product design.
So how does this unhelpful advice solidify into helpful advice?
Well, I think that there's a few ways that you can look at these successful titles and successful products and sort of absorb them. I think if you have the inkling of an idea, give that elevator pitch to someone you don't know, someone who is very comfortable hurting your feelings, and see.
Not your mum.
Right. And be like, would you buy this, or does this interest you at all? And if it does interest them, ask them what about it interests them, right? Because when I tell you to give someone an elevator pitch, I mean like a one sentence hook. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna give them a few paragraphs of like, oh, here's all the cool stuff going on about it. What's the thing that they were like, oh, that part sounds kind of neat. Take that part, build everything around it, make that your guiding light, and that's your North Star, and everything is focused in making it that version of that thing. And if you want to look at examples of this done well, just walk around your local board game store, see what games other people pick up, see what games catch your eye, and try to think of like what elements of it are standing out to you. Try to be very critical about it. And I would say you gave the advice of like start with the title or the theme. That's not always how games start. I think that's not necessarily useful for everyone. I think some people do better starting with the mechanics, but I do agree that like that it needs to quickly become tied into the rest of your game. And one way that you could do that is if you start with the mechanics first and you're having trouble figuring out how to make it mesh with the theme, think of a wacky theme, because a wacky theme can help you incorporate weird mechanics that wouldn't otherwise make sense. Famously, I think I've said this in the pilot episode of this show, Plants vs. Zombies was because he needed something where people knew that they couldn't move the towers. He didn't want to have like an archer, because why wouldn't the archer just walk to where they needed to be? He needed something that was literally rooted to the ground, so keep it plants for the defense, and he wanted something to fight against that's very slow moving in huge numbers. Plants vs. Zombies.
Oh crap! I had we're live, so I can't say let's stop until I think of it. I had a thought.
Now you guys know what idiots we really are.
This is what happens in real life. Oh yes, I might have told this story on the podcast before. I have an assistant who comes by once a week to help me out with stuff, and she's not a gamer at all. She's played my games after working for me for 8 months, but she's like, she's not the kind of person to go into a game. And so I was trying to explain this idea to her between like a game that, oh, that sounds fun, and a game of like, ooh, I want to play that. And it played out like I'd scripted it. I was telling her about Cartouche. I was like, you're archaeologists, you're rebuilding the Hatshepsut's like things, and Cartouche is this. And she's like, that sounds really cool. She's being very nice. And then I followed it up with, this is, that time you killed me is chess but time travel. She's like, what? And I was like, there it is. Like, if you're not getting a like, ooh, then for me, it's dead.
Also, that's such a good point. Once you find that phrase that catches people's attention, that gets people excited, write it down. That is what you're putting on your sell sheet.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to my point 2. And remember, I feel bad about this. This is all unhelpful advice. So you're going to be like, cool, thanks, Peter. Great. AJ is here to turn it into helpful advice. I've written as my note, make games with no speed bumps. Jeff Bezos, I think, calls them paper cuts. CJ the X, my favorite YouTuber, calls it friction or drag. He calls it wind drag or something like that. And basically, while you're playing the game, and we've done a whole episode on rules exceptions. This is that, but like to the 10th degree. While you're playing the game, if you're like, what? I cut that. Like, anything that makes you be like, wait, how does that? It's gone. And how do you do that? You be a designer for 13 years, but also just like be aggressive. Be aggressive. Like, if I'm watching people and they stumble, the common designer reaction is like, well, okay, but they don't get it, or they're having. Like, I'll give you an example. The game that Witch's Brew became. I was playing in Toronto with my friends Frankie and Jenna, who don't listen to this, who you know. You've been to their house. We've recorded in their house before. We've recorded 3 episodes in their house, and they were playing this cafe game. And Jenna just kept being like, what is the difference between draw a spell and cast a spell? Like, she couldn't wrap couldn't wrap her head around it. And Frankie was like, this is a really obvious difference. You're the idiot here, Jenna. And we all had a laugh. And like, I was like, cool, not a problem. Played it again yesterday. Different, like, professional board game designer was playing it, being like, every time he went to draw, he would cast, and every time he went to cast, he would draw. And, or you know, the terms were just very misleading. So it's very easy to be like, that's 2 people. That, like, no. As soon as it's 2 people, it's 1,000 people. If your game gets published, that's thousands, hundreds, millions of people, depending on what level of success you reach. And I'll tell you, if it's millions of people, it's not going to reach millions of people. Like, Anything like that now, I just aggressively prune. How do you recognize that? How do you do that? I'm not being helpful today. AJ, how can people action that?
So, if you are as good as we are, I'm going to arrogantly compare myself to you in this one respect, at least.
Okay.
Then you can pay attention to people while you play. Many designers, especially new designers, aren't good at multitasking like that. They can't think through the strategy of what they're doing and think through possible changes to the game and pay attention to body language and questions that come up and those sorts of things. If that's you, don't play. If that's you, sit it outside the playtest. If at all possible, just watch other people play so that you can take notes and pay more attention to body language and do all those sorts of things. I think by removing yourself from the game, that gives you the best chance of being able to identify these things. But if anyone ever asks you a question, write it down. If anyone ever says, that they don't understand something or they get confused or mix something up, write it down. Make a note of that. That's something you have to fix
That's
later
the speed
on.
bump. Yeah.
Yes. So that's how you identify the speed bumps. How do you fix it? You have to listen to every other episode we've done. But I would say, I'd say some good rules of thumb. Don't be scared of changing other systems in order to fix that speed bump. A lot of the times when you see designs that have band-aid solutions, it's because they refuse to rework another part of the game to fix the speed bump. So they slapped something else on top of it to try and solve the problem. And I think and I think that you need to be willing to look at other options with changing things about the design. Sometimes, though, it's as simple as graphic design. Sometimes it's as simple as changing zones of play. This is something where I have to be extra cognizant because I do 99% of my playtesting on TTS. And on TTS, sometimes people forget things, not because it's unintuitive, not because they didn't forget the rule, not because it's not good graphic design, not because of X, Y, or Z. It's purely because it wasn't in their field of view because they were too zoomed in. And you need to be able to identify that. So I would say playtesting on TTS, you have to be especially vigilant and you have to be especially careful figuring out what the cause of those issues are. And if you're not confident being able to figure out what the cause of the issue is, then you have to make sure you get some physical playtesting in. Which you should do anyway, I just don't.
You 100% should. I might have talked about this before. I'm a big believer in working as close to the final form as you can. We were actually talking about before we started recording that I art my games way more than you're supposed to because I just want to see what everything looks like. I do all the UI. I'm not a graphic designer. My UI is not professional level by any means, but I want to make sure that everything is in the right place so that if it goes to a graphic designer who doesn't know the game, because a lot of graphic designers will be like, they don't have time to play all the games they're working on, they can imitate it and it'll function. Okay. The next note I think we covered, so feel free to say, skip this one. Don't settle or compromise or make excuses. This is the number one thing I see new designers doing. I'll give a really harsh example. I'll play a game and I'll be like, this is never going to exist. This is going to overlap with our Daniel Games blog episode, or two-part episode, which is that most prototypes I look at, I'm like, cool. I hope that you're enjoying designing this. I hope that you're learning from it. If your goal with this prototype is to get it published, that is realistically not going to happen because this is not a product game. This is not a good enough game. And a lot of designers will be like, yeah, but... And it's like, cool. You're now going to spend the next 6 months to 2 years of your time beating this dead horse until you finally give up and move on. I iterate very fast. I make a lot of games. I throw them out very quickly. We've talked about this before. It drives AJ nuts sometimes. Because I'm like, I want the hits, I want the bangers. So yeah, don't settle, compromise, only make hit games. How helpful, AJ?
It depends entirely on your goals. So this podcast is primarily aimed at people who want to be professional designers in the industry, who want to make board games that will get published and that are going to sell copies and that gamers are going to like. If you want to make a game for you and your 3 friends, I honestly think that, I don't really know why you're listening to a podcast like this, because
I'm going to defend this hypothetical person.
Okay.
If this is your hobby, I think this is an amazingly fun hobby. It is fun to make a thing. It is fun to show it to friends. it is fun to watch people have those moments of joy, even in a game that's not going to get published. Like, I think those are all fun things. And if that's your hobby, like, you listen to, you're a game designer, but let's pretend you're not a game designer. You play Magic the Gathering, you're going to listen to Mark Rosewater's podcast because you like Magic the Gathering. Like, not because you want to professionally play or design Magic the Gathering, but because it's your hobby and you like hearing about it. So I think there is a portion of our audience who are like, this is the thing I do for fun. If it makes money, great, bonus, but that's not what they're in it for. And I see you, and you are valid.
I don't disagree with that. I just think so much of our advice is aimed towards people who want to do it professionally that, like, I'd generally be curious to see what percentage of our podcast is actually actionable and useful for them comparatively to a professional designer who I would say 100% of our advice is useful for.
I'd say 70%.
You don't think? You'd say 70%? What's the other 30%? Or is that the fun question?
Have you listened to previous episodes? There's a lot of stuff where, like, I don't even agree with that anymore. Do we have an email address? That's come join the Discord. We'll put a link to the Discord in the show notes. Come tell us if you can answer that question, because we would love to hear.
We do also have
cool.
an
You got
email.
anything else on that one?
Every single show notes, every single one.
What's the email? Tell us what our email is.
our podcast, it's funproblemspod@gmail.com.
Nice. Okay, anything else on that one?
I don't think so.
Cool. Okay, this is one that I've been thinking a lot about just in the last 2 weeks, so I put it on this list, which is, again, I'm going to read my note and then go into it. Integrate theme so much you don't even notice the work it's doing. And this could be a whole episode, and maybe this will be a whole episode, maybe this is not on place on this list, but it's just been so top of mind lately. I designed Witch's Brew. It was a coffee game, and from day zero, it was a coffee game. Everything in that game was about brewing coffee, collecting coffee ingredients, etc., etc. Which was announced, I was like, cool, got to retheme it. But so much of it was also witches. It was witches and coffee to the bones. Like, everything, you could point to any part of that game and be like, that's witches and coffee, or that's witches or coffee. There was nothing that was like, and there's a mechanism because you need a mechanism. So, when I was like, well, can't be witches making coffee because tea witches exist, which I hope does really well, by the way. This is not me being bitter, it's just like, this is the nature of the game. The game of making games, not the nature of tea witches. I was like, cool, well, what else could witches be doing? So I changed it to witch doctors. So now you are witches who are, like, helping wounded unicorns and dragons. And I stripped out all the coffee, and I brought it to the table, and it was probably 60-70% harder to play. Because in the coffee version, 1 milk and 1 coffee makes a coffee. 2 milk and 1 coffee makes a latte. And you're like, yeah, of course, lattes require more milk. In the new version, it was like 1 healing crystal and 1 potion make this. And it was completely arbitrary. I had tried to theme as much as I could, but it was coffee to the bone. So it was really, like, pasted on theme. AJ and I have a bug game, which the publisher at one point was like, maybe not bugs. And we had to be like, you understand, if not bugs, everything needs to be reworked. Like, the example I always give is, there's a butterfly and a caterpillar. One of them can fly, one of them can't. Which one is which? With that theme, you don't even think about it. So that's what I mean, like, the work that the theme is doing, you don't even notice. And for me, this comes from starting from that title, or, as you said, very early on, integrating a theme as hard as you can. Is that sufficiently unhelpful for this episode, AJ, or have I crossed the line into vaguely helpful advice?
I think you've crossed the line to vaguely helpful, but let me add a little bit more helpful.
So bad at this.
So bad at not being helpful.
It's okay, guys. The next one, incredibly unhelpful.
Is that an AJ-led episode? Is this a shot at me?
No. The next piece of advice I have.
Oh, okay. I thought this was because I don't agree with everything on Daniel's blog.
Oh, right. No, we've got Eric.
We'll cross over.
Make my vaguely helpful advice more helpful.
Yes. So I'm going to reiterate my advice for integrating theme when you start mechanics first, bottom up, where if you need to do something and it's not quite working, look at something wacky to be able to make it work and make sense. I'd also say if you're having trouble finding the right mechanic to fit with your theme and it's not feeling cohesive, you should read Isaac Shalev's and Jeff Engelstein's book, The Building Blocks of Game Design.
We're live, AJ.
It's live. You know that I stutter now. How brutal. So that's a book that's all about mechanics. It's just a huge list of them. It's an encyclopedia and how they suggest using them, examples of how they were used, things like that. Really interesting read, and it's really good for giving you some inspiration as to what could possibly be a good fit.
Amazing. Okay, this is perhaps the least helpful. No, this is probably the second least helpful. I have not gone to conventions this year. This is not the advice, this is incidental. I'm taking the year off conventions, and as a result, it's harder for me to pitch games. This is what happens when you don't go to conventions. It's not impossible. I think we'll do an episode on conventions if we haven't already. But I am not going to conventions. So I was like, okay, I really want to start. I've got some game designs I'm really proud of. I really want to start the ball rolling. I organized one-on-one meetings with about a dozen publishers, maybe more, just emailed them, was like, hi, I'm Peter. Here's a list of my games that I've made. Can I jump on a call with you, not to pitch you a specific game, but to learn what you're interested in, what your company's doing, where you're going, etc., etc. This is actually really common in Hollywood, where I live. It's just called meetings. So when you get signed with an agent, the first thing you'll do is do a round of meetings, and you'll just meet with the execs from every network and be like, they'll be like, look, we really want a female-led crime show. We really want a family thing that uses whatever. They'll have a list of things that they want. And that doesn't mean go away and write exactly that for exactly that network and spend 6 months of your life, because then if they say no, maybe it's a no. But by doing this, I now have detailed notes on what a dozen publishers are looking for. In an ideal world, this would be on their websites, but it updates so much that they just, that's not their job. Their job is to make and release games, not to provide game designers with information on how to best pitch to them. So this is an incredible, I'm fully aware of how unhelpful this is, because this is an incredibly privileged position where I can be like, hey, jump on a call with me, you'll have a good time. And B, not only do I have these individual lists, I'm now super aware of the trends of tomorrow, what these publishers in aggregate are looking for. Have we talked about the game I play? I don't think we have. I play a game with publishers, and they're like, a game? Hooray, a game! I love games. And I list about a dozen published games, not by me, but games that they know, and ask, if this came to you, if you didn't know this was going to be a hit, would you sign it, yes or no? And they've never thought in this framework, so they're like, this is so fun, they learn more about their company, I get a really, I narrow down exactly what their tastes are. It's fun for all. Most people can't do this, that's unfair, but the games I use are something like Azul, because some publishers are like, if you brought them Azul without the clicky-clacky pieces, without it being a worldwide hit, does that fit their line? Sometimes it doesn't, even though it's a hit. There's a lot of games that I use as little litmus tests. And so, yeah, the unhelpful advice I have is meet with every publisher and ask them exactly what they're looking for in a way that charms and delights them. You know what, I think that's helpful as it is. I don't think you need to say anything, AJ.
No, just be Peter's level of charming with his level of connections and his ludology.
This is why we had to call this episode Unhelpful Advice, because I'm like, that helps no one. That is the least helpful thing you can hear as an aspiring designer. And I'm sorry, but AJ's gonna make it actionable. AJ.
So I think there are two things you can do that sort of act on this.
Emulate,
advice.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thing number one is, if you're privileged enough to be able to go to conventions, then just go to every booth, just take 10 seconds, say, hi, I'm, AJ, or, your name, whichever you prefer. And
no, if you don't say AJ, this will not work. AJ, it's okay. The episode's called Unhelpful Advice. We can say anything. There's no rules. By the way, for video viewers, it is 113 degrees or 45 degrees in LA right now. So if I'm getting increasingly red, I had to turn off my air conditioner for the recording. I am going to be dripping by the end of this, and it's not just because of how attracted I am to AJ. It is mostly a temperature thing.
Only mostly.
Only mostly.
So yeah, take a few seconds with the publisher at each booth and just say, hey, this is my name, here's my social, whatever, but whether they're interested or not in your game, just say, hey, what types of games would you be looking for? And if they say no to your game, you can ask what types of changes would make it appeal to them, if any, or what types of games they're looking for in the future, so that if you have anything else that you might be able to pitch to them, you can show them that right away, and if not, you can keep it in mind for later. And like Peter said, if you do this with everyone at an entire large convention like PAX U or something, it's going to give you a good idea of what games they're looking for.
You did this, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend playing Peter's game with them at the convention. I don't think they'll have time or interest.
Let's just make a blanket statement. We never recommend playing any of my games. That is the official Fun Problems policy. Don't play Peter C. Hayward's games.
Good policy. But like, yeah, if you're, can you imagine if it became a trend though, and then all of a sudden a publisher's like, this is the 7th person in a row who's asked me what publishers
don't do this. I was going to say we should cut that part out. I don't want to subject the publishers to that. Here's what we should do. I'm going to pitch this to you live on air. We should do a series where we get publishers on and play that game.
Ooh,
Isn't that a fun idea?
That's a fun idea.
Yeah,
let's put that in the back pocket.
Yeah. Okay, we're running out of advice anyway. We've resorted to we're out of helpful advice. Here's some unhelpful advice. Here's
just some things we might do at some point.
Yeah. That means this episode specifically is unhelpful advice.
Another thing you can do is when you cold email publishers, the typical thing that you do is you pitch them the game that you think is most likely to get signed by them, not necessarily every game that you have in your back pocket. If they say no, then you can follow up and you can be like, well, what types of games are you looking for? Again, if you have one that you've already designed, maybe you could pitch that one and segue. And if not, then you know, again, for next time, what types of things they're looking for. So even if you can't make it to a convention, there is a way to be able to get some of that information and start building a headcanon.
Yeah. Implied but not stated is I then only pitch that publisher the stuff that they're looking for. I hope that was obvious without me saying it. Sort of to tack onto that whole general thing too is when they reject a game, and most of my pitches get rejected. The vast majority of pitches I make, I'm signing 10 games a year. I'm probably pitching 30, 40, 50, 100. Like, I don't know the numbers. Some designers, have you seen this? Some designers track their pitches and sign stuff. That's really interesting to me, but I do not. I think I would find that demoralizing.
Yeah.
I will often reply and be like, why? And because they know me from the conversation or from my reputation or from this podcast or whatever, they're not like, oh, I don't want to get into an argument with this guy. They will be like, here's why. And that's super helpful. I'll use Kurt Covert. I don't think he'll mind me using him as an example. Smirk and Dagger. He was like, look, this game is a lot of fun. I really like it. I think like he didn't like the theme, so I fully rethemed it. Like not physically, but like in the email, I was like, here's a theme that would work. And he's like, that's a great theme that would work. I'm not going to sign it because we want our games to be, after we playtest it, it sticks in people's brains, which in its own way is unhelpful advice. But I'm like, oh, okay. Like some people really want a slick, polished thing. Kurt wants something that is going to stand out from the market in a particular way. And that's really useful for me to know. So I'm not going to pitch him XYZ because I know that even though it's a solid game that another publisher genuinely will and has signed, it's not going to work for Kurt because what he's looking for. Cardboard Alchemy, another great example. They want a game they can bloat. That's not a very kind word, but they want a Kickstarter that has, I think Critter Kitchen had 72 stretch goals. My 18-card Button Shy game is not going to do that. Like, it's not physically possible. You know, our game Battle Bugs with AEG, that's not going to have 72 stretch. It just can't. Like, it doesn't make sense unless they wanted to do 7 years worth of content, in which case, cool, we've got to go design for another 2 years and playtest for another 3 years before we can even get there. So saying why not in my position can be really helpful. Anything on that, or I'll jump on to my next point?
Next point.
Okay. I had to frame this episode. Yeah, agreed. I had to frame this episode as unhelpful advice because, in a sense, don't do this. I can get away with it, and I think maybe AJ's like, this is not helpful to tell people, but that's why the episode's called Unhelpful Advice. I think there's something in here for someone, but don't do this. I will design a game that is mechanically rock solid and then pitch it saying, here's what I have and here's where I want it to go. As a new designer, you can't do this. AJ, can you reply now? I feel so uncomfortable, and then I'll come back with like some examples. But this one, This one makes me cringe. This is me visibly cringing.
If I were you, I would not have publicly said that I did this.
It's. I think it's useful for people to hear what the life is like once you hit a certain point. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're just like Peter. You're just exposing yourself as a charlatan.
I don't think you're a charlatan. No. Like it's not like the games you pitch. Like you said, it's not that they're like bad. They're really good. They just aren't done. They need a lot of polish, right? Like that's what the 70% line is, right?
No, not polish. Okay, I will go into my examples. So Critic Kitchen, probably my biggest hit at this stage. Me and Alex designed that. The core, the three workers that you put out, or the three chefs that you put out, so fun. Just instant, hits all the brain chemicals. Go listen to our brain chemical episode. We're on YouTube, so we can have a little thing being like brain chemical episode pop up in the corner. Super just fun to play. Like just one of those things where you're like, oh, this is going to be a fun experience. And then we were like, look, we want this to have player powers. We want to add this new thing called zoo chefs where you can recruit these guys who have individual powers. We haven't done it. We haven't written those yet because we know that we can, and we can point to our ludography and say we've done this before. So the game is done, but the content is not. Battle Bugs, our game with AG, we pitched 6 factions. 4 of which were really thoroughly play tested. We were like, these 4 could go to publication today and we'd be happy with them. The other 2 are not. But from the 4, you get the idea of how it works. And from we promised to do the work. And again, reputation helps, being able to point, call Peter Vaughan and he will tell you we do the work. But it's not a completely finished, ready to print product.
Yeah, so it's interesting because those are very, very different examples. With Battle Bugs, that needed some development time, but development's the whole point of it anyway. Like those
That's
factions,
standard,
yeah, those factions I think were fun as is. I think they're much more fun now that we're a year into development and all that hee. But
I don't think either of us were happy with those at the time of pitch. But I was like, look, I want to pitch this now because if no one buys it, I don't want to spend another 6 months developing.
Yeah, that one also as a product is very different though, because we could have just launched it with 4 and the game would have been done. You know, that could be done.
Most publishers could launch Critic Kitchen without any of the content we added, and it would be a game. But
so
I would Alchemy want those 72 stretch goals, and we were like, we will bring those to you, but we haven't done them.
So I would argue that the game wasn't 50 to 70% done. It's like you did have a complete game, just not with the content that gives it more replayability. Right? It would be like...
The exact words I used were 50 to 70% of content.
I must have missed that. Shame with these live recordings, isn't it?
And to your point though, a lot of these games I've played it 5-10 times and been like, cool, this is ready to pitch. Whereas a published game, ideally we will play it 100 times. I have not balanced to it being played 100 times.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
that's
for
more
sure.
I think what you were responding to originally before I told you were wrong and silly and had a better bid than you.
Yeah, I think this is something I can work off of.
Cool.
So my off-the-cuff helpful version of this advice is if you have a game that uses, say, a map, right? You don't necessarily need to make the map modular. You can build a game with one good map. If you're doing a hidden movement game, right? Make it with one map, and I think it's fine to go to publisher and say, hey, it's totally done. It would be cool if we could make the board double-sided and I could do another map, but I haven't done that yet. I think that is totally reasonable. And I don't think that's a turnoff to the publisher saying, hey, there could be more content in here, but as it is, it's already good and could be published.
Okay. I feel like in today's market especially, you want that, maybe it's a me thing. I want that extra content. But as a designer, I can't afford to make all the stuff before it's signed. It just doesn't make sense because let's say I do, it takes 6 months of my design time and then no one signs it. Cool. I could have made 4 other 50 to 70% content games in that time. You know what I mean? I understand why your reaction was so why are you telling people this? That makes a lot more sense now.
I think it totally depends on where you're as a designer too. If this is your first game, you've been working on it for 5 years, and like you really want this game to succeed, put in the extra time. If you're trying to do this full time and you've got like 6 games on the go at once and you're pitching all these different games to different publishers at the same time, don't go to 100% with each of these games.
Yeah. I feel like for a first design you should, but then it's the problem that we see all the time of people who just make a first design obsessively and never get anywhere with it.
Yeah, I think it would be fair if you make extra content, but like us, right, you don't necessarily have it totally balanced. It's like this content is here, it functions, but it needs some development. I think that might be like a level to go to. What do you think?
Yeah. It's hard to say. I'm the unhelpful one, AJ.
I mean, I'm kind of in that like unknown state. You know, like there are people who know me in the industry, but not many. And I have a lot of designs, but I've barely pitched to many. And even though I have a signed game with AEG, you know, that doesn't. It helps me start emails like, "Hey, I'm AJ. I have a game with AEG. Here's my pitch."
Yeah, and once it comes out and hopefully does well, that helps you even more. Like, I have a wonderful working relationship with Allplay. What's that?
That's why I'm so lazy. I'm like, I don't need to pitch my games. Once this comes out, everyone's going to see that I'm a genius, and then they're going to look at all my pitches. I've got like 10 completed pitchable games. I'm just not really bothering pitching.
Oh, crap, was it? Oh, yeah. I work a lot with Allplay. I think I'm signing my 6th or 7th game with them or something.
Nice.
And that relationship exists 100% because he reached out to me being like, that time you killed me, loved it, let's meet. And I was like, okay, random person. And then we met, and now he is my most frequent publisher collaborator. Yeah, by far, like not even close. And it's not helpful, but like once you have a hit, it is easier to pitch future games. Mm-hmm. That wasn't one of my pieces of unhelpful advice, but it absolutely. Oh, it is actually. Anyway, I'm going to skip one then. So, unhelpful advice: get a reputation for being someone who's good to work with. People generally speaking like working with me. I want to say like Joe from Allplay have a great relationship. Peter Vaughan and I hang out as friends all the time and love working together. Like, I don't think I'm a difficult designer.
I noticed that you didn't mention me.
Yeah. So no, I think you and I I think AEG are really enjoying working with us, and they've said like they've kind of closed the doors to pitches, but we are allowed to because they like us and they know that we are going to do the work.
I meant as a co-designer, not with your publishers.
Oh no, I'm talking about publishers. That's why I was like, I guess you were fun to work with as a publisher. No, I'm talking about like with publishers. Publishers like me. Oh god, this is the most arrogant episode. I feel so uncomfortable with this, but we're gonna power on through. Publishers see my Facebook posts. They read my book reviews. They know that they might watch an interview with me or play one of my games, and they're like, this guy seems fun to work with, which hopefully I am. And then I meet with them and I'm like, also, I'm a really hard worker. Here's my references. And so I have started to develop... I'm saying started. I'm nowhere near the level of like John D. Clare or any of the big designers, but I have started to build a reputation as someone who is fun to work with, will do the work, is passionate, and will make a game that hopefully will sell for them. And that's, their job, the way they keep their lights on is by selling games. So that one's sort of more important than the rest. But, as you know, people want to work with people they want to work with more than they want to risk, two people being equal, you want the one who's fun to work with, and two people not being equal, you really, really, really want the person who you know is going to put in 110%.
Or even just reliability. If you have someone who... is good, and you're like, this other person might be better, but I know this person is reliable. They're going to do the job. They're not going to, mess anything up. And I know how to work with them. I know, like, the way that they work. That's why it's, like, it's not even, like, just straight nepotism or something. It's just, like, if you have a good experience with someone, you're way more likely to just go back to them than to go searching and maybe finding someone as good.
Yeah. Okay, so without having... As of today, I'm at 21 signed games with other publishers. Without having 21 signed games with other publishers and a bunch of release things, etc., how do people get a good reputation?
I think this is almost unhelpful advice from me, but if you are privileged enough to have free time and money to do this, volunteer or find find some
And that doesn't
way.
have to be at conventions. People will hear volunteer and be like, "Oh, at conventions, I don't live in America. Great, thanks, guys." No, tell the story of how we got in with AEG, because I would never have pitched that game to AEG. You were the one who set up that pitch, and then like with the CEO of AEG, and like that was all you, baby.
Yeah,
with
he didn't
zero
even-
published designs. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and I didn't even mention your name initially. Like as soon
at
as
all.
I had the pitch, I said that I said your name. I said I had a co-designer, but I didn't like name drop you to get the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I volunteered on their Facebook design forum. They had a design forum that used to be quite active, now has sort of lapsed. Hopefully it will get back up and running at some point, but we'll see. And they were looking for moderators, and I reached out and I said that I would moderate because I had just gotten laid off, so it was great timing. I had a bit of free time for it. But
you
even
were
if I didn't-
privileged enough to just gotten laid off.
Yes. Woo. But even if I didn't, like, it doesn't take that much time to moderate a forum, especially not with a team of people. And one of the things was they said, if you have a game that you want to pitch, because all of the people who were volunteering were designers, this is a designer forum, they said you can just let us know. You don't have to go through the standard process. That was like the one perk of the job. I mean, it was also like nice to work with AEG, but that was the one thing.
That was the payment almost.
Yes, yeah. So I didn't have anything for them that I thought would be a good fit at the time. And then even after the forum sort of lapsed, I came to them like months later, and I literally just Facebook messaged the CEO because I had a working connection with him, and just said, hey, I've got a game that I think would fit for you. And immediately he was like, yeah, let's schedule a time. And easy as that. And if you can find some way like that, some sort of in where you can, I res it as a cost, sacrificing your time, and it's a bigger cost for some people than others, but it is a very convincing and effective way to get an in with a publisher that you want to have a good relationship with.
Yeah. I completely meant to open this episode by talking about the concept of unfair advantage. So AJ, just take this bit and put it at the start, because we're able to edit this episode with no problem, right? Have we talked about unfair advantage, specifically like the business concept?
We have not on the show.
Do you know what it is, like personally?
Yes, because you told me.
Okay, cool. So basically, if you want to start a business, everyone who wants to start a business has also started a business, and most people are not going to get to the top. So you need to sit down and be like, what is my unfair advantage? Because running and starting a business is so hard that you need an unfair advantage to get ahead, which sucks. Like that's not great, but that is the real world. And if you can isolate your unfair advantage, then you can get ahead. So I'll use Hollywood as an example. You want to be an actor? Cool. Everyone wants to be an actor. What's your unfair advantage? Now, the best unfair advantage is just to be the world's greatest actor. Cool. If you're the world's greatest actor, the book's so good they can't ignore you. It comes up a lot for me because I really love that book. Like, if you are so good at what you do that you don't need to play these games, great. Just like bring it to anyone, and someone will be like, "This game is the best game ever," and it'll go to the top. Like, I genuinely believe that. For the rest of us, we need to be like, what is our unfair advantage? And that's what this list kind of is. I'm like, look, at this point, these are my unfair advantages. When I started, my unfair advantage was that I had the capacity to start a publishing company. Yours might be you live in Indianapolis, and you might think, Peter, that's not really an unfair advantage. It absolutely is. Why is that an unfair advantage, AJ?
Because Indianapolis is where Gen Con is or something? I don't know.
Yeah. So you can volunteer at Gen Con for zero cost. You don't have to get a hotel. You don't have to fly. And obviously most people listening to this don't live in Indianapolis. So you need to work out what your unfair advantage is. Like, it's going to be different for every person. AJ's, I think we've discussed this, at least personally, is that you worked at a board game store for however many years. Like, that's an unfair advantage because now you know product better than any aspiring designer that I know.
I have
Not that you're still.
of...
I'm not calling you an aspiring designer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no offense taken. I was just objecting to that being the only unfair advantage I have.
Right.
I'm a straight white male from an upper middle class family whose wife's job can support me doing this as long as I need to.
That last part is the relevant part, I think.
Yes.
Every designer is a straight white male. You said, you know what I mean? Like, statistically, that's who's designing games. That's not an advantage in this field. Whereas wife supports you full time, so you can spend all your time designing. Absolutely is. Mine, when I started with that, my career requires me to live nowhere in particular. So I was able to move to Toronto, the board game center of North America in some senses, And specifically, I lived in Toronto because of that. Anyway, so the framing of this episode was meant to be unfair advantage, and now I realize how long we're going, so I'm going to zip on to my next point. If that's cool, AJ?
Yep, please.
Cool. Next one, unhelpful advice. Be a publisher for 5 years, because as a publisher, you will take pitches and you'll understand what makes a good pitch. You will publish games and understand to your bones, to your bank account, what the difference is between a hit and a flop. And you will understand production stuff. You'll understand what the workflow looks like. When I pitch a game to a publisher, I ask for an unusually high royalty. And I'm like, because I will be like, not in a bossy, braggy, like interfere way, but I'm like, I get it to a degree that most designers can't, and I will bring that knowledge and expertise, and like that is actually valuable. It sounds like I'm talking about being a know-it-all who's going to try to backseat drive. Not at all. Like, I understand this process from top to bottom because I have now published as a publisher 17 games. I don't even know what the number is. 15 games, 12 games. That got lower every time because I don't know and I don't want to overestimate. But like, I get it, and that is so valuable to other publishers to be like, oh, he's not going to suggest 700 unique dice. He's not going to say, why don't we just get Quanchai to do 700 pieces of unique art. He's not going to... My girlfriend works in film, and the director was a first-time director, and she was like, can we just get Taylor Swift to do the music? I was like, no. No, you can't just get Taylor Swift to do the music. I'm never going to ask that question because I've been through the trenches and I get it. AJ, turn that into helpful advice. An easy task, I feel.
I think you should go watch my talk, Why Your Good Game Won't Sell, because that's where I go into a lot of product design talk. Now, granted, that was like 7 years ago, so, you know, might be a touch dated, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, I think. And I think a lot of the advice I give there is for people who are self-publishing. Even if you're not self-publishing, you want to understand what your game as a product is going to look like. And if you think of your game as a product and look at that video and listen to the things that I'm saying, it's going to help you understand whether or not your game can succeed as a product. But that video aside, I think look at similar games to yours in the marketplace. And if your game is very different in one particular way, then ask yourself, is there a reason why no party game costs $200? Right?
Except Blood on the Clocktail.
Yeah, and there's a reason that's a very niche game.
Yeah. It's not on shelves at board game stores for sure.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, right? Is it's not even like $100. It's $100 on Kickstarter. You can't buy it at retail, and if you did, it would be a lot more than $100.
Yeah.
But yeah, those kinds of questions, and think about if there's multiple things. If it's not just like, oh, this has a lot more custom dice, or this has a lot more minis, or this has a lot more whatever than a normal type of game in that field. If there's multiple weird things, what are you doing? Like, really seriously ask yourself that, because maybe it's because you approaching this from a different angle completely. And you've come up with something really clever, but much more likely you're doing something very wrong, I would say.
Yeah. A lot of my points can be kind of coagulated into I design to market these days. This is the one I had as like a kind of final note, which is when I'm pitching a game, I'm thinking about it on 3 levels. I hope we didn't do this in another episode. I can never remember. Which is, I'm thinking, which publisher does this make sense for? And AJ and I have talked about this before. I design to a specific publisher every time, because even a successful specific publisher, because even if that publisher says no, they're clearly doing something right, and other publishers have a chance of being interested. Battlebugs, the AG game, was designed with all play in mind specifically. He passed on it for a variety of reasons, but because all play are a big publisher and AG are a big publisher, there was enough overlap that AG were also interested. I then sat down and played that game with John Zinzer, the CEO, and I discovered that by chance we had brought him a game that ticked off every box of what they were specifically looking for. That was very fortuitous, but it wasn't a coincidence. It was because we were targeting the market. So I think about which publisher. I increasingly think about what platform they're going to sell it. A game that I'm designing for straight to retail is very straight to board game stores is very different to a game I'm designing that I think will go to Kickstarter, is very different to a game that I think will go to Barnes and Noble or Walmart or Target or any of the big box. Like, those are three distinctly different markets. And from the moment I start designing a game, I am now thinking about which market it's going to. Kickstarter, you want to have stretch goals, you want to have bling, you want to have this. Barnes and Noble, you want your mum to be able to pick up the rules and understand it fast enough, and you want to have some kind of like mainstream hook. Board game stores, you want to be in a genre, and we've done an episode about genre, I believe, where people who like worker placement games will be like, ooh, a worker placement game, etc., etc. And that also applies to a certain extent to Kickstarter and Barnes & Noble, but I think that's almost like a primary thing. You want the AJ of Board Game Bliss 10 years ago, when someone walks in, to be like, well, I like this game, and he's like, got it, I know exactly what I can sell you, and you want that to be your game. And then thirdly, I think about, interrupt me if you want to respond to anything before I finish I think about what game night people are going to be excited to take this to. Because this is a kind of showy off hobby, and I mean that in a good way. Like, books, you're not I guess there's book clubs, but like, you are targeting someone who's going to sit by themselves and read a book, and you want to know what they're reading. Board games are a social experience, and they're also a bit of a show-offy experience. So you want to think like, why is someone going to be excited to bring this to their game night and battle other games to bring it? Like, just getting your game played these days in such a saturated market, you need to have an edge in that mini game of getting your game to the table. You want to provide the player, in this case the person bringing the game, with the tools to win the game of get your game played. And that is a multi-step process. So I am in the, again, fortunate position of, I have a non-gaming group, I have a heavy gamers group, I have a party game group, I have a girlfriend who loves games, and so I'm always thinking about who is going to bring this to which kind of event and fight for it to be brought to the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really useful lens to look at games through. That's one that I don't hear talked about, and I think it's super valuable, because if you think about like a giant Kickstarter game, Kingdom Death Monster, right?
Yeah.
That's one that I cannot bring to a friend's house. Like, right. Physically, logistically. I can't bring all the stuff that I need to. It's like 40 pounds or something ridiculous.
Yeah, you need a second car.
Yeah.
But that is one that you build a game night around.
Yes. So
and that's a very specific... I'll interrupt briefly. Stonemeyer says on his website, we want to be pitched the main event of the night. We want to be pitched, people are coming over to play this game. You know, your wingspans, your scythes. Not the filler beforehand, not the like, okay, we've finished, let's throw out a party, let's bring out a party game to wind down. They want the main course, and that is something to think about. Go ahead, AJ.
Yep. So I think just breaking it down, saying to yourself, because every game is going to fit in one of those contexts, right? It's hard to imagine a game where it's like, there's no possibility of anyone ever playing this game. If so, why are you making it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can name a lot of prototypes that fit into that category.
Yeah, I mean... If you're looking at your game and you're like, there's no way that anyone... Actually, maybe you should give some examples of... Can you think of any published games that you're like, there's just not really a place for this?
Can you see my camera yet?
Peter's gesturing to every game he's ever designed. He is saying that all of them are useless and no one has ever played them.
Meow and Dracula's Feast are two of my published games, so I feel very comfortable being negative about them. Meow and Dracula's Feast are really cool, quirky, interesting ideas that have no audience. Dracula's Feast is a 10-minute deduction game that requires a large player count where you sit in silence, and if anyone makes a mistake, the game breaks and has a 15-minute teach. Who is that for, AJ? Who wants to, like... And I've had people get excited because it's such a cool, weird idea and bring it to the table, and then it just crashes and burns because it's a laborious teach, and if anyone makes a mistake, it's wrong, and you're sitting there in silence. They're expecting werewolf, they're expecting, One Night Ultimate Werewolf even, but instead they got, like, it's a logic puzzle. It's a Sudoku disguised as an 8-player experience. Who is that for? Meow is similar. I was like, it's a party game, you do wacky things. No, you sit there in silence and try to remember the rules, and occasionally do a wacky thing sort of obligatorily because that's one of the rules, and no one has fun. Outside of my games, I don't feel comfortable, but like I think you're right. I don't think those games get published because who are they for?
Mm-hmm.
I can give you a
And
film example.
ooh, please.
Tomorrowland. Did you ever see that?
No.
Yeah, no one did. Or Lightyear. Lightyear is probably a better example. Lightyear is a Toy Story sequel that's a serious sci-fi. Who asked for that? Like, what are they doing? It was Pixar's biggest flop, I think. Tomorrowland was one of Disney's biggest flops because I liked it. I really liked the way it's a Dracula's Feast of Films, in that it's really interestingly assembled. But who's it for? Like, there's just no audience for that movie, except people who watched it because they like other Brad Bird films and were like, "This is weird, cool."
So let's pause for a second here and think about it. So
We can't, AJ. This is live.
so with Dracula's Feast, for instance,
Yep.
you're saying like there's no context in which someone's like looking to pull that out. Like,
Yeah.
is there? If that was your prototype, are you looking at that and you're
It
saying
was.
like, I'm talking to the audience.
I met you with that prototype. Do you remember? That was the first ever
Yeah.
encounter we ever had. What do you think of that when you played it?
I didn't like it. I think I said that, but I said it in
yeah.
a very nice way.
I'm not asking for feedback for my feelings. I'm just like, did you have that thought of like, who is this for?
I didn't have that thought as to who is this for. I was still very green in the board game space at that point. I played probably like 1 or 2 dozen modern hobby games at that point, something like that.
Oh, really?
Probably 2 dozen. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That was right when I got into hobby
Oh, I didn't
games
realize
at
that.
the time. Yeah, I was
I've
actually.
been part of your board game experience from the start.
Yeah, you're my origin story.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's lovely.
Yeah, that was at the first Pro TO, and I brought some prototypes to that, and most of my experience had been like Twilight Imperium, Descent, Magic the Gathering, and then
Yeah.
basically I saw some games on Dice Tower Top 10s that I picked up on a whim, and like that was basically me going into it. Go ahead.
I have an answer to the question, but keep going.
No, go ahead.
Galaxy Trucker today, I feel, is right on the edge of like, what environment do you pull that out? It's a real Pendulum or Sorcerer City. Like, in no way am I trying to deny. Like, Vlaada Chvátil is my favorite designer of all time, and Galaxy Trucker was what got me into the hobby. So in 2013 or whenever I played that, like, I think that absolutely had a place. Today, I don't know that it does in the same way. All 3 of those games, Sorcerer City, Pendulum, and Galaxy Trucker, are real-time strategy games, and I don't know that there's a big audience for those.
But big
in
audience
today's
isn't
market.
the same framework as what group pulls it out, right? Like, so
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what group pulls those out. I could see myself teaching it to my girlfriend, but she'd be like, cool, can we play Res Arcana or Shot and Totten or something that is, like, got more of an identity? I could see convincing a group to play it, maybe, but, like, it's a lot... Here's what it is. It's not that it doesn't have a place, it's that it doesn't give you the tools to win the game of get this game to the table.
But so, like, looking at Pendulum, for example, which I haven't played, and I'm not super familiar with, but I do know it's a real-time strategy game, obviously. So why does that not fit with Stonemeyer's framework of a main course game?
I think because it... Well, again, I'm not saying it doesn't have an audience. This is probably a whole sub-episode that we should do, and if we weren't live, I'd say, like, let's cut all this, but let's finish the thought. I like this framing that I came up with live of games giving you tools to win the game of get the game to the table. I think that's a really useful framework to think things through. This is a new idea, so I'm not married to it, so if you're like, Peter, that's actually useless, shut me down. But let's use a hit game. I'm going to use Things in Rings, which I realize is my game, but it's just I happen to be super familiar with that and I didn't prep anything else. Things in Rings is a Venn diagram game. People are like, Venn diagram game? That's a cool idea. Once it's on, it has cool table presence. As soon as you see the table, you understand that game. And the publisher loves this about it. He's like, people at conventions walk up and they see the table and they see the rules in my hand because they're not playing and they understand everything about the game. That game gives you a lot of, and it's fast, and it's a fast teach, and there's no rules to it. That game gives you a lot of tools to get at the table. Low entry, visually interesting. People like Venn diagrams. Pendulum, which I also haven't played, so I don't want to be too harsh about. I'm sure it's a really good design. I don't think they would have signed it otherwise. There's not a lot of people who are excited by real-time games in a strategy environment. So it's sort of like who is it for right there. It's going to have all the rules overhead of your wingspan or your scythe or whatever, probably a little bit less. But it's going to let you embarrass yourself by getting it wrong in a situation where you can't stop and explain what was wrong. So it's set up to fail in that sense. It doesn't give you, like, what are the tools that it gives you to bring to the table? I can't think of any other than it's a Stonemaier game. I don't think the theme is that compelling. I don't think the mechanism is popular. And it has stuff working against it. It has drag in that, like, it could embarrass you in front of your friends in real time in a way that Wingspan, you can always pick up the rulebook and sift through it or ask a question. You can't do that in Pendulum. And Wingspan also has the bird theme, which is a really cool novel theme. It also has designed by a woman, so a lot of female game designers are going to be like, female game players are going to be like, oh, this is for me, in a way that I don't feel, Space Tech Game 64 is. And it has the beautiful art, which I'm sure Pendulum has as well. But do you know what I mean? Is this framing making sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense.
I don't want to dwell on this too long because we're running past an hour at this stage, but carry on. Finish your thought and move on.
Feels like this could be a different episode. Tools for getting a game to the table, which is something I love talking about. On-ramping new players, that's like my favorite topic.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick fire round because this is stuff I wrote as we were going and so you don't have any notes about. Unhelpful advice. Co-design with brilliant people. It's so helpful to have a co-designer like AJ, who, when I bring him a problem, between us, we know we can solve it. Alex and I work together a lot because we can be in the same space and just develop it at a rate 10 times faster than if I was working alone. My co-designer, Matt, with the game I'm currently pitching around, he pushes me to make better games than I would if I was making it by myself. There's been so many times where I'm like, this works. He's like, but it could be better. It could be better, it could be better, it could be better. And so we spend a week on it, and I'm like, this is twice as good as it was last week. It makes an impactful difference. So unhelpful advice is just find the best game designers and work with them. AJ, can you make that helpful off the cuff?
Yeah. Go to whatever local design meetups there are / cons. There's protospiels happening all over the place. And even if you can't make it to one of those, there's a lot of online design forums. And if you play in those and show your games and play test other people's games, you'll probably quickly make friends, or at least quickly know who shares the same sort of sensibilities as you do, and you can work with. And then, you can do a trial run and co-design with them. I will say, having done a lot of co-designing, your results may vary. And so part of this advice is hold on to the thing you're working with them very loosely.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to let it die or let the project die. And if you can, kind of like a prenup, at the beginning of the project, sort of discuss what happens if one person loses interest in it or something like that. We've never had to do that, even though one of us has lost interest. No, one of us has lost interest, but we never did a prenup. Because I'm not worried about that.
That's because my philosophy is just give them the idea. Don't be precious about your ideas. If you couldn't get it to work as a team, you're probably not going to get it to work by yourself. And if they think that they can, let them have it. If they're the one who loses interest, then be like, cool, can I have that? And if they're like, no, then be like, well, then you haven't lost interest. Mm-hmm. If I lose interest in an idea, I want you to have it because we thought it was cool enough to work on, and I can't get it to the table. Maybe you can. And I have enough ideas that I'm not married to any one of them.
Right. And I would say if you run into creative differences, that's something that I kind of struggle to give advice on, because if you and I have a disagreement about a mechanic or something, right? The answer isn't, well, I disagree with you. I like my version better than yours, so we're just not going to do it. The answer is always, if we can't talk it out, let's play both.
Bring it to the table.
Exactly.
We had that happen. I've told this story 3 times since it happened. You don't know this. Which is that I came up with a mechanism and AJ was like, and I've done the same thing reverse. This is not pick on AJ day. He was like, I think that's going to overwhelm the player. And so we said, okay, bring it to the table. You play it, and we will set up the most possibly overwhelming version of it to just stress test it right there and then. And a turn in, you're like, this is not overwhelming me. And we're like, mm-hmm. Cool. At least we know we can start with that. I'm not saying, therefore, it has to be in the game. But we had enough knowledge to know that it's going to overwhelm the players is probably not an issue.
Mm-hmm. And like we always say, MVP it. Like, it didn't take that long to test that idea,
Yeah.
And
We didn't have all the sub clauses worked out of like edge cases. We were just like, bring it to the table and see if it works. And so yeah, that's I don't know how we're on co-design. Oh, because I've said design with brilliant people.
Yep.
Okay.
Anything else?
Elevate, elevate, elevate. This is related to some stuff I said earlier and what I just said about Matt. Now that I've seen Matt do that, every time I'm playing one of my prototypes, I look at it and I'm like, I'm going to make this a little bit better. And then I make it a little bit better. You see how unhelpful this advice is? But like, as a result, the game is better. AJ, can you turn that sentence of unhelpful advice into actionable advice?
That is the most vague thing you've ever said. Make the thing better.
Yeah, but I will play it and I'll be like, okay, cool, I'm liking this, this is working. Instead of settling, be like, could this work from its core stronger? Could this be magnified? Like, there's a rule in game design of double the numbers. Apparently in video games, was it you who was telling me? They're like, multiply it by 1,000?
Yeah, it wasn't like design advice necessarily. It was just like a Twitter thread. It was like, as an experiment, just multiply a number by 1,000 in your code and see what happens. Yeah. And I think that's fantastic game design advice to take in spirit, where it's like, what if we just do this crazy thing? What if we do just give the players this really overpowered thing? What if we do just make this affect really well? Just Carl Chuddick it up.
Yeah. When Tom and I were working on Village Pillage, the artist and graphic designer Tanya Walker wrote us a message once to be like, working with you guys is like watching a pair of velociraptors circle a locked down building and just relentlessly find the weak spots and get inside. Because we just kept on like doing another pass. And again, this can turn into the bad obsessive thing of like, you work on a game for 10 years and it never comes out. But I do this obsessively. This is my life. Board game design is my life. I told you I sat down for 11 hours flat and made the first version, Witch's Brew, and the second version, and the third version, and the fourth version, and the fifth version. I will often just open up a spreadsheet of a game I'm working on and just read through it and just be like, that could be a little bit better. That could be a little bit better. That could be a little bit better. That does get harder as you get more projects, but I've never found it not to be worth it. And then, like I said, looking at the core mechanisms and being like, okay, but what if this was just like better?
So I'll try and spin this.
I'm giving you the easy task today. I'm the unhelpful one. This is a great role. We should do every episode like this.
I always think you use the unhelpful one in my heart.
That's how we work as co-designers too.
I think that my super negative take on this is the market is very saturated, and only amazing games are going to be able to come out. Amazing products, I should say, because an amazing product means a lot more than just an amazing game. Yeah. And so if you have a game that is good, it is not good enough. You cannot be satisfied with that. You have to look at your design and think,
I saw a talk about this once.
Oh, yes. But this isn't a product design issue I'm trying to narrow down. It could be anything. It could just be the gameplay. If the gameplay is good, then that's not enough. If it's amazing, it's not enough. I think what you need to do is think about sort of every element of your game and wonder, is there a way to make it better? Whether it's the theming or how intuitive it is or how simple the rules are, all those sorts of things. And if you can't find a way to make it that top tier, then maybe you just have to design more games and get better, or maybe
that's
you need
a good way
to
of
shelve
framing it. Yeah. Have a standard and make sure every part of your game meets that standard. Don't let there be any holes for the Velociraptors to get into.
Yeah, I've had to shelve a lot of good games. I think I'm up to like half a dozen good games that I think like if I had made these 15, 20 years ago, they'd get published easily. And nowadays it's like, you know what? They're not even close.
Not even a chance. Yeah.
No.
We'll probably talk about that more in our Daniel.games blog episode.
Yes.
He talks about that a lot. Okay, last one, I promise. Very unhelpful. Have a brand as a designer, because that makes it easier for publishers to know what they're going to get, It makes it easier for consumers to be like, if I like this, I'll probably like this. And it makes it easier for you because you can really specialize. So when I started, I thought my brand was going to be no victory points. I've now made a dozen victory point games or something like that. I don't like victory points. I try to avoid them, but sometimes it's the best thing for the game. That's some helpful advice, is let go of stuff. God, I used to hold on to stuff tight. Let go of it. If you're like, but I want to make no luck and the game sucks, add luck in, and if it's fun, cool. Follow the game. And so my two brands, I would say, are that my games have just infinite content. I love generating content. AJ gets frustrated with me sometimes because I'm like, can we add 5 more cards to this deck? And he's like, why? It has 25 cards and you play 3 per game. Why do we need 5 more? And I'm like, okay, what about 7 more? And can you help me come up with them? And he's like, no, what are you doing? That Time You Killed Me famously has 4 chapters, and the 4th chapter is about as much content as all of the first 3 chapters. And the last envelope in the 4th chapter alone is as much as the whole rest of the game put together. Like, it's Barbara Is You is my favorite game because it just never stops giving you stuff. Like, literally it does, obviously, but like way more than you expect. Critter Kitchen has 72 stretch goals or whatever it had, like just crazy amounts of content. And then my other brand is I had a publisher tell me this and I hadn't realized it, is that my games always have like a oblique take on whatever it is. So like That Time You Killed Me is sort of the abstract game, but it's also a campaign game and you don't have to like abstract to play it. That Time You Killed Me is a party game which stretches your brain. Like, my games always have this kind of like off-kilter angle. I don't know why, said the man in a blue beard and a zebra print top. But those two things have established a brand for me from a publisher's point of view anyway, and someday hopefully from a consumer's point of view, and make it easier for me to design new games because now I have like a starting framework. Unhelpful advice? Can you make that helpful on the spot?
I think this is another one where it's very designer dependent. I think there is basically no through line through my designs. I mean, there's aesthetics. You know, I generally speaking favor very light rules and very elegant gameplay. That's what I strive for. I would say like that's the only thing I could really settle on for my framework, but that's so vague. Like I do party games, I do strategy games,
I would argue that yours are heavily player interactive in a way that
that's true.
A lot of games are not.
That's true.
Including some of my games. I have some games, I think most of mine are player interactive, but I think yours are, that is a strong through line throughout your work of what I've played. I haven't played all of your games.
No, that's definitely true. Player interaction is like the number one most important thing, I think, to me.
I couldn't see you designing a roll 'em right or caring about a roll 'em right.
I made a roll and write with player interaction.
But you know what I mean? Like a classic separated solo Euro roll 'em right. That's just not an AJ game to me.
Yeah. At some point, I'm curious to stretch my wings and do a solo game, maybe with some handsome blue-bearded fellow. But we'll see. But yeah, I think
handsome blue-bearded fellow. He sounds great.
But I think for trying to pull this into advice is if there is a genre that you're really into, or if there's a specific style, or if there's something, if you just love a mechanic, it's fine to super deep dive into that mechanic and be that mechanic person. Matt Gertz is like the rondelle guy, and all he does is rondelles, and he makes really, really good rondelle games.
And he's the best in the world at it because he's specialized. Uwe Rosenberg, worker placement, polyominoes, like, you can name a lot of Stefan Feld, point salads, like
Matt Leacock co-ops.
Yeah, if you are good at something and like it, then specialize. Like, absolutely double, triple down on that and make it better and better each time. That's a completely reasonable and valid path to success in my mind.
But if you don't, and you're like me, and you are just, very ADD and like, oh man, that looks cool. Oh, that looks cool. Like I design in genres I don't have any interest in playing, just because I get an idea and I want to get it out of my head, and I think that's fine. I'm
going to push back on this because all the things you're describing about you is 100% me, and yet I'm still able to find these through lines. My biggest hits are a 2-player abstract, a 10-minute party game, like a 45-minute light Euro, and we're coming out soon with like a 3-hour heavy Euro. It's a pretty diverse range of what I do, and yet I think you can still find through lines in your work.
Sure. It depends on how broad of a through line we're talking here. Like,
Right.
for me being like, it's elegant.
No, but
Like,
my examples were like, my games have a lot of content and they have an oblique approach to that genre. And those are not genre specific. Those are not...
That's true.
Yeah. Anyway. Cool. Any other thoughts on anything that we've talked about? Or else we'll move into the end of the episode and let our viewers go, because we have gone long. We always go this long, but we normally edit it down. But we couldn't for a live episode.
Yeah. I would like to give one piece of unhelpful advice and have you fix
Oh,
it.
yes. I love it. I'm in.
My unhelpful advice is a lot of designers love the idea of having a finished game. A lot of designers like getting positive feedback about how fun their game is. But I think the most important thing is you have to find the process fun. So my unhelpful advice is find the fun problems element of game design, where you run up into a problem and you have to solve it. Find the iteration process. You have to find all of that fun.
So there's a thing in writing we might have talked about, which is some screenwriters whose podcast I listen to would ask every guest, do you like writing or do you like having written? And this is professional writers. We're not going to explain what happened for podcast listeners. You just have to go check out the video. It's because I'm on Apple, if you're wondering. And so the split between professional designers, it only works for me, was surprisingly even. It wasn't like everyone answered the same way. It was a 50-50 split. So I don't know that is valid advice, which is different to unhelpful advice. I would recommend learning to love the process, because it's going to be a lot more process than it is. I mean, in one sense, once you have written forever. But it's such an unreliable genre, unlike writing. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. But I don't think that it's as simple as like, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. I think identifying that you don't like doing parts of it is completely valid. I hate updating TTS. In our co-designs, AJ's in charge of updating TTS because I just can't stand it. And now for my other designs, I pay him to update those as well because I can't stand doing it. Identifying part of the process you don't like is different to loving every part of the process,
Sure, yeah, and not loving part of it is natural. I don't think there's anyone who start to finish adores every single element of it. I mean, I guess there probably is someone, but but I do see, whenever I see burnout, whenever I see people who are like really down on game design or like get depressed from it or those kinds of things, it's always the people who want the end result and don't like the process. If it's genuinely work for you, I just feel like maybe there's a different hobby that's better for you. But I mean, if you're comfortable pushing through miserable work of making the game to have it, go for it. That's why it's unhelpful advice.
Just being self-aware of that is helpful, I think.
Yes.
Knowing that you don't like writing but you love having written gives you something where at the end of it, you're like, okay. There's a quote from John Cleese that I quote all the time. He says, the difference between an amateur and a professional writer is when it gets hard, an amateur writer is like, this is hard, it's not working, I should stop. A professional writer is like, I'm at the stage where it's hard and I feel like I should stop. I recognize this, and they keep going. Recognizing that you don't like the process, totally valid. If you don't like the end result either, what are you doing? That's bizarre.
And I mean, I don't like physical prototyping, right? But I've cut that out of my
thing. Comes by once a week to do that for me. Okay. Do you have a fun question? If not, I have one.
Go for it.
Okay. I have been decorating my house lately. I've lived here for 8 months, and I'm finally putting stuff up on the wall. If you're a viewer, you can see some of what I've got right there. AJ, if you had an infinite budget, but your current house, and don't be silly and be like, I'd put dollar bills so I could be a millionaire. What would you decorate your house with? What would you put on all the walls and stuff like that? Give me a succinct answer. Don't go wall by wall through the whole house.
You've asked the worst person, because I look around. It's beige. This is my office. I've had it for a year and a half.
You would keep it like this? This is your answer?
No.
Okay.
But for my office, I probably would. I have sound foam here. All the things you can see around here are where the sound foam was supposed to go, and it isn't sticky enough, which is why you're hearing a bit of echo, but hopefully we can edit that out. I really like paintings, so I would get some nice paintings. I was just showing you one. Let me. Oh right,
Put
Dancing
it in
at
the show
Dusk.
notes. Put it in the show notes.
Yeah, Dancing at Dusk is a beautiful painting that I saw in person, and I was just talking about how I might buy it for thousands of dollars. So maybe I will pretend like I'm rich.
That's your when next time you get an advance, you'll pick that up.
But I think current house, there's not much I can do because a lot of the things I would want to do are things that I would need to just have the bones for. You know, I like big open rooms, nice tall ceilings, all the cheap stuff. You know, the one thing I would put a lot of money into is a kitchen. I do a lot of cooking, and I would really love to have nice marble countertops and, you know, all the bells and whistles and a nice, beautiful, you know, horseshoe kitchen. Just make the perfect layout, that sort of thing. I think that'd be like my number one thing, is not really decoration, but just having a really good kitchen.
Yeah. You already know mine because we were just talking about it, but my favorite artist is a man called Rob Gonzalez. I'll put some of his. I'll try to put some of his art up by literally just holding an iPad to my camera. He sort of follows on the tradition of MC Escher. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it's almost like a tessellation is not quite the right word, but it's like two worlds combining in a kind of child book style. I love his work. I love it. I would cover every wall in my house with either art from my game or originals of his work. Like owning an original of all of these would just like, he's got so many too. He's prolific. He unfortunately died of suicide a few years back, but before he did, he created so much stuff that just like is exactly for my brain. I love him. This is one of my favorites. It's children bouncing on a bed. Oh yeah, we should describe it for the podcast listener. It's children bouncing on a bed with a yellow, so not yellow, green and dark green checkered thing, but the bed sort of morphs into a field, and we see that like past a certain point they're not bouncing on a bed, they're flying over fields. I love it. I love his stuff. And
cool.
As you can see, if you're watching the video, he's got so many. If you go to robgonzalves.live, I believe we'll put a link in, you can see all the stuff I'm showing off now. This one's cool. Can you want to describe this one for us, AJ?
My picture quality's too bad.
It's an observatory with someone like looking out at all the stars. But then it's revealed that like, well, some of them are actual stars, some of them are just a curtain with stars painted on them, and someone's opening the curtain to let the sun in. It's just like this weird blending of worlds. Anyway, did you have fun? Was that the fun part of the episode? The only part where we had fun?
I did have fun.
I hope you didn't have fun at any other point, because that's not allowed.
Never. Not with you.
Do we still do teasers? I can't remember.
No. Thing of the past.
Okay. No teaser for you, but please do let us know in the comments or on the Discord what you think of a video episode, because it is more work for us. So we don't want to do it if no one cares. But if you enjoy looking at our beautiful faces and my very busy background and AJ's very not busy background, let us know, because I think, you know, if people like it, we'll do more of these. Am I right, AJ?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope, we're good.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.